Hello, hello, hello! Greetings, salutations, konnichiwa, and every other form of green across this vast, marvelous multiverse. I am Matsu Quinox. This is Horace, and welcome once again, my dear scholars, to the study. Let's see, I have some messages from you. Oh my goodness, thank you for the resubscription, Yulian. Welcome! Hello there, Dr. Zadium. Welcome. I see from earlier, FT Wastes, insert first redeem here. I should probably get on that. Let's be honest. Private Mavic, welcome. Rub-a-dub-dub, 3 men in a tub. You're not that far away, actually. Hello there, cool skeleton. Welcome. I see you from earlier. Hello, hello. And much program, game developing going well. Oh, excellent. I'm glad to hear your projects are going well. Oh my goodness, hello there, all you fine, wonderful scholars. Oh, hello there, Firefly. Welcome as well. Oh my goodness. It's good to be back here in the reading room. It's been not that much a while. I mean, we did a reading, I think it was 2 weeks ago? Maybe a week ago? I can't remember exactly how long. Oh, hello there, Solar Coast. Welcome, and your test is successful. Grades will be on Friday. They will be posted. So be sure. Why am I saying that? I'm not a teacher. I'm a librarian. That's Sophia's job. Sophia's the teacher. I'm the librarian. Dr. Zadium, cool skeleton. Hope you're not using Unity. Ooh, there a reason for that? Solar Coast, looks like I was able to sign in normally. Oh, good, good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. How are all you wonderful scholars doing, by the way? I hope you're doing well. Cool skeleton, nah, am using Scratch. Oh, cool skeleton, am good. Glad to hear it. Dr. Zadium, doing well. Good, good. There's not much to report here in the study. It's been just another day. Horace and I have been just working. Ovid and Virgil are still getting a little bit used to being our little team. Sometime I'll have to introduce all of you to Ovid and Virgil. Um, it might be a while before they show up, but you know, they'll make appearance at some point. Oh my goodness. So yes, today we are doing a reading stream. If I, as I said before on the schedule, which I posted earlier this week. Oh my goodness. Um, so today we will be reading a book that I have been. It's been on my list of books to read for the stream, and I promised it several times before, and of course things got in the way, other things got busy, been doing collabs, things like that, got sick, so I haven't been able to do it, but today we are finally starting it. Today we'll be reading 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. Written by Jerome K. Jerome. Yes, that is his real name. It is not a pseudonym. And it actually has a little bit of an interesting history behind it. It was written in 1889, and when it was, here's the thing with it. Back in the during the late 1800s, there was a big craze in England and Britain on personal boating. Now that might sound like an odd thing to you that's such a big deal, but at the time, um, due to various different situations, um, people could finally use their own boats on trips essentially, and people would buy boats or rent boats, and they would go out boating along the rivers of England, and they would stop off at various little places, especially on the Thames. The Thames was a very popular river to boat on, and they would stop at different locations, see tourist sites, stop at pubs, that sort of thing. And Jerome K. Jerome at the time was tasked to write a guide on boating down the Thames, which it was meant to be a very serious guide, meant to be very informative, educational, and tell you like where the best picnicking spots would be, where the best drinking spots would be, what locations you could see, what activities you could do. You know what I mean. That sort of vacation guidebook. Um, the thing Jerome was in very good spirits at the time. He was almost in too good of spirits. He was incredibly happy and a little bit way too happy, so he started writing the book normally, which when we get to the book, there will be sections where it is very informative, very educational, very a little bit bland, but very informative of what you're supposed to do with boating. But he kept writing in tangents of little things that he had experienced boating with his friends. And they were often very, very funny things, very humorous. Um, and he just kind of got lost in the whole zeitgeist of his happy mood, let's put it that way. And so the book turned out more of a comedy book than it did a serious guide to boating. And the book was a big smash hit with a lot of people. I mean, it's considered a classic of British humor. It was also savaged by the critics. Um, Not because it was a bad book, but because critics at the time felt that it was degrading English literature, that it was appealing to the common folk, that its use of slang terms, oh my goodness, it used slang terms. Its use of slang terms basically lowered the intelligence of the reader. It was kind of funny in retrospect, actually. Um, but yes, oh my goodness, I turned this into a lecture. I apologize, my dear scholars. I know you're here for the funny haha times, but I'm sorry I got into a little bit of a lecture. I thought it would be a good idea, though, to just kind of prepare you for what we're going to read. I hope you don't mind, my dear scholars. You don't mind, do you, Horace? Well, I'm glad one of you will think it's good. Oh, excuse me. Dr. Zanim, hey, it's nice to learn about things you read. Oh, thank you. Cool Skull, no, I like listening to you rant, Julian20. That was fascinating. FTWA, so it was an everyone is now stupider from what you just said sort of critique. Yeah, basically. It was thought at the time that it was appealing too much to not enough to the gentleman reader, and too much to, your average man on the street, man and woman on the street, shall we say. And that was considered a bad thing at the time. A lot of people have said with this book that the humor actually has aged fairly well. Now, I will say there are bits and pieces that have aged poorly. I will, of course, not read those parts. I'll kind of skip over them or change the wording. But we're going to keep it as uncut as possible. So, my dear scholars, shall we begin our journey down the river and see what all this fuss is about? Or would you like me to rant some more? Dr. Zadium says yes. FT Waste, please and thank you. Oh, so polite, FT Waste. So polite. Excuse me. Excuse me. Private Maverick, sure, let's go down by the river in a van. Well, I don't live down by a river. What was it? How does that go again? Live by in a van down by the river. That's how it goes. That's how it goes. I couldn't remember the way it's said. So, let us begin our reading of 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog, by Jerome K. Jerome. Chapter 1. Now, the chapters do have names. I'm not going to read the names because they're all really long descriptions of what the chapter is. So we're going to skip the actual names of the chapter and just go with the numbers. Chapter 1. There were 4 of us, George and William Samuel Harris, and myself, and Montmorency. We were sitting in my room smoking and talking about how bad we were. Bad from a medical point of view, I mean, of course. We were all feeling seedy, and we were getting quite nervous about it. Harris said he felt such extraordinary fits of giddiness come over him at times that he hardly knew what he was doing. And then George said that he had fits of giddiness too, and hardly knew what he was doing. With me, it was my liver that was out of order. I knew it was my liver that was out of order, because I had just been reading a patent liver pill circular, in which was detailed various symptoms by which a man could tell when his liver was out of order. I had them all. A circular, by the way, is an advertisement. It is a most extraordinary thing, but I never read a patent medicine advertisement without being impelled to the conclusion that I am suffering from the particular disease therein dealt with, in its most virulent form. The diagnosis seems in every case to correspond exactly with all the sensations that I have ever felt. I remember going to the British Museum one day to read up on the treatment for some slight ailment of which I had a touch. Hay fever, I fancy it was. I got down the book and read all I came to read. And then, in an unthinking moment, I idly turned the leaves and began to indolently study diseases generally. I forget which was the first distemper I plunged into. Some fearful, devastating scourge, I know. And before I had glanced half down the list of premonitory symptoms, it was borne in upon me that I had fairly got it. I sat for a while frozen with horror, and then in the listlessness of despair, I again turned over the pages. Sorry, you're going to hear me laugh a lot during this. I came to typhoid fever, read the symptoms, discovered that I had typhoid fever, must have had it for months without knowing it, wondered what else I had got, turned up St. Vitus's dance, found, as I expected, that I had that too, began to get interested in my case, and determined to sift it to the bottom, and so started alphabetically, read up ague and learned that I was sickening for it, and that the acute stage would commence in about another fortnight. Bright's disease I was relieved to find I had only in a modified form, and so far as that was concerned I might live for years. Cholera I had, with several complications, and diphtheria I seemed to have been born with. I plodded conscientiously through the 26 letters, and the only malady I could conclude I had not got was housemaid's knee. I felt rather hurt about this at first. It seemed somehow to be a sort of slight. Why hadn't I got housemaid's knee? Why this invidious reservation? After a while, however, less grasping feelings prevailed. I reflected that I had every other known malady in the pharmacology, and I grew less selfish, and determined to do without housemaid's knee. Gout, in its most malignant stage, it would appear, had seized me without my being aware of it, and zymosis I had evidently been suffering with from boyhood. There were no more diseases after zymosis, so I concluded there was nothing else the matter with me. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. This is kind of relatable. This is kind of relatable, honestly. I sat and pondered, I thought what an interesting case I must be from a medical point of view. What an acquisition I should be to a class. Students would have no need to walk the hospitals if they had me. I was a hospital in myself. All they need do would be to walk round me, and after that, take their diploma. And then I wondered how long I had to live. I tried to examine myself. I felt my pulse. Could not at first feel any pulse at all. Oh, 1 second, my scholars, 1 second. Sorry about that, my dear scholars. It was Virgil playing another one of his knock-knock pranks. No, everything's fine, dear cool skeleton. Everything's fine. I just need to find where I am now. Virgil has this thing, you know. He likes to knock on the doors when I'm reading. He thinks it's hilarious. Kintron, hypochondriac should be banned from buying medical texts. But he went to the library, essentially, so it's not a medical... So he's not in the... So he can get away with it, unfortunately. Firefly, I have chocolate ice cream, so I'm good. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Sounds amazing. Cool skeleton, you're not a fan of chocolate ice cream? Oh dear. I personally like vanilla, let's be honest. Oh, where was I? Oh. I could not at first feel any pulse at all. Then all of a sudden it seemed to start off. I pulled out my watch and timed it. I made it 147 to the minute. I tried to feel my heart. I could not feel my heart. It had stopped beating. I have since been induced to come to the opinion that it must have been there all the time, and must have been beating, but I cannot account for it. I patted myself all over my front, from what I call my waist up to my head, and I went a bit round each side, and a little way up the back, but I could not feel or hear anything. I tried to look at my tongue. I stuck it out as far as ever it would go, and I shut one eye and tried to examine it with the other. That'd be quite a sight. I could only see the tip, and the only thing that I could gain from that was to feel more certain than before that I had scarlet fever. I walked into that reading room a happy, healthy man. I crawled out a decrepit wreck. I went to my medical man. He's an old chum of mine and feels my pulse and looks at my tongue and talks about the weather and all for nothing, when I fancy I'm ill. So I thought I would do him a good turn by going to him now. What a doctor wants, I said, is practice. He shall have me. He will get more practice out of me than out of 1,700 of your ordinary commonplace patients, with only 1 or 2 diseases each. So I went straight up and saw him, and he said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" I said, "I will not take up your time, dear boy, with telling you what is the matter with me. Life is brief, and you might pass away before I had finished. But I will tell you what is not the matter with me. I have not got housemaid's knee. Why I have not got housemaid's knee I cannot tell you, but the fact remains that I have not got it. Everything else, however, I have got." And I told him how I came to discover it all. Firefly, this guy seems so full of himself. Well, he's got quite an active imagination, let's be honest. Then he opened me, and looked down me, and clutched hold of my wrist, and then he hit me over the chest when I wasn't expecting it, a cowardly thing to do, I call it, and immediately afterwards butted me with the side of his head. After that he sat down and wrote out a prescription, and folded it up and gave it me, and I put it in my pocket and went out. I did not open it. I took it to the nearest chemist's and handed it in. The man read it, and then handed it back. He said he didn't keep it. I said, "You are a chemist." He said, "I am a chemist. If I were cooperative stores and family hotel combined, I might be able to oblige you. Being only a chemist hampers me. I read the prescription. It ran: a 1 pound beefsteak with 1 pint bitter beer every 6 hours. 1 10-mile walk every morning. 1 bed at 11 sharp every night. And don't stuff up your head with things you don't understand. Honestly, I think this is some of the best advice you could get. Let's be honest. I followed the directions, with the happy result, speaking for myself, that my life was preserved, and is still going on. Let me get a quick drink of water. Now I should mention, the main character is based off Jerome K. Jerome himself. His friends are based off real people as well. The only one who is fictitious in the book is the dog. Kidtron, I'm all in favor of being prescribed steak and beer. Firefly, such a healthy diet. Densuo, derp 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 derp. Hello Densuo, welcome! We are reading 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. In the present instance, going back to the liver pill circular, I had the symptoms beyond all mistake, the chief among them being a general disinclination to work of any kind. What I suffer in that way no tongue can tell. From my earliest infancy I have been a martyr to it. As a boy the disease hardly ever left me for a day. They did not know then that it was my liver. Medical science was in a far less advanced state than now, and they used to put it down to laziness. "Why, you sulking little devil, you," they would say. "Get up and do something for your living, can't you?" Not knowing, of course, that I was ill. And they didn't give me pills. They gave me clumps on the side of my head. And strange as it may appear, those clumps on the head often cured me, for the time being. I have known one clump on the head have more effect upon my liver, and make me feel more anxious to go straight away then and there, and do what was wanted to be done without further loss of time, than a whole box of pills does now. You know, it often is so. Those simple old-fashioned remedies are sometimes more efficacious than all the dispensary stuff. We sat there for half an hour, describing to each other our maladies. I explained to George and William Harris how I felt when I got up in the morning, and William Harris told us how he felt when he went to bed. And George stood on the hearth rug and gave us a clever and powerful piece of acting, illustrative of how he felt in the night. George fancies he is ill. Oh, hello there, Abs! Welcome, and thank you for the raid! Hello there, raiders! Welcome! For everyone who's new, I'm Matsu Quinox, Omniversal Interdimensional Librarian. This is Horace. I do gaming streams on Tuesday for the most part, and reading streams on Thursday. And currently we're in a reading stream, reading 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog. It's good to see you all. Private Maverick, put away pitchforks, no monsters among them. Oh, come on. They're wonderful raiders. We must welcome them. I would offer you cookies and tea, but unfortunately, we're a little out at the moment. FT Waste, wait, how did he miss me? Well, you're very good at hiding, FT Wastes. Abs, nothing like ending a murder spree with a good book. Indeed. That is very wise words. Very wise words. George fancies he is ill, but there's never anything really the matter with him, you know. At this point, Mrs. Poppets knocked at the door to know if we were ready for supper. We smiled sadly at one another and said we We supposed we had yeah, and said we supposed we had better try to swallow a bit. Harris said a little something in one's stomach often kept the disease in check, and Mrs. Poppets brought the tray in, and we drew up to the table and toyed with a little steak and onions and some rhubarb tart. Oh my goodness, rhubarb tart sounds so good right now. I must have been very weak at the time, because I know after the first half hour or so, I seemed to take no interest whatever in my food, an unusual thing for me, and I didn't want any cheese. This duty done, we refilled our glasses, lit our pipes, and resumed the discussion upon our state of health. What it was that was actually the matter with us, we none of us could be sure of, but the unanimous opinion was that it, whatever it was, had been brought on by overwork. I need to think of a voice for Harris and George. Yeah, what is a good voice? What we want is rest, said Harris. Rest and a complete change, said George. The overstrain upon our brains has produced a general depression through the system. Change of scene and absence of the necessity for thought will restore the mental equilibrium. George has a cousin who is usually described in the charge sheet as a medical student, so that he naturally has a somewhat family visionary way of putting things. I agreed with George, and suggested that we should seek out some retired and old-world spot, far from the maddening crowd, and dream away a sunny week among its drowsy lanes. Some half-forgotten nook, hidden away by the fairies, out of reach of the noisy world. Some quaint perch eyrie on the cliffs of time, from whence the surging waves of the 19th century would sound far off and faint. Harris said he thought it would be humpy. He said he knew the sort of place I meant, where everybody went to bed at 8 o'clock and you couldn't get a referee for love of money, and had to walk 10 miles to get your bakey, whatever. I'm not sure what a bakey is. Bakey? No, said Harris. If you want rest and change, you can't beat a sea trip. I objected to the sea trip strongly. A sea trip does you good when you are going to have a couple of months of it, but for a week it is wicked. You start on Monday with the idea implanted in your bosom that you are going to enjoy yourself. You wave an airy adieu to the boys on shore, light your biggest pipe, and swagger about the deck as if you were Captain Cook, Sir Francis Drake, and Christopher Columbus all rolled into one. On Tuesday you wish you hadn't come. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday you wish you were dead. On Saturday you are able to swallow a little beef tea and to sit up on deck, and answer with a wan, sweet smile when kind-hearted people ask how you feel now. On Sunday you begin to walk again and take solid food, and on Monday morning, as with your bag and umbrella in your hand, you stand by the gunwale, waiting to step ashore. You begin to thoroughly like it. I remember my brother-in-law going for a short sea trip once for the benefit of his health. He took a return berth from London to Liverpool, and when he got to Liverpool, the only thing he was anxious about was to sell that return ticket. Oh my goodness. It was offered round the town at a tremendous reduction, so I am told, and was eventually sold for 18 pence to a bilious-looking youth, who had just been advised by his medical men to go to the seaside and take exercise. "Seaside?" said my brother-in-law, pressing the ticket affectionately into his hand. "Why, you'll have enough to last you a lifetime, and as for exercise, why, you'll get more exercise sitting down on the ship than you would turning somersaults on dry land." He himself, my brother-in-law, came back by train. He said the Northwestern Railway was healthy enough for him. I've been on a train several times. Train travel is wonderful. It's lovely. I actually think train travel would be probably better than a ship travel. Granted, I have never been on a long ship voyage. And if you're wondering how have I been on a train, well, there is a train in the study. I take it twice daily. Another fellow I knew went for a week's voyage round the coast, and before they started, the steward came to him to ask whether he would pay for each meal as he had it, or arrange beforehand for the whole series. The steward recommended the latter course, as it would come so much cheaper. He said they would do him for the whole week at £2.5. He said for breakfast there would be fish followed by a grill. Lunch was at 1 and consisted of 4 courses. Dinner at 6, soup, fish, entree, joint poultry, salad, sweets, cheese, and dessert, and a light meat supper at 10. Kinshon, there's a lot of study to cross. Makes sense to have a train. And a knack with portals. Yeah, about portals. We do have a couple of portals here. I tend to avoid them, since portals tend to be random, and you never know where you might end up, unfortunately. My friend thought he would be close on the £2.5 job. He is a hearty eater, and did so. Lunch came just as they were off Sheerness. He didn't feel so hungry as he thought he should, and so contented himself with a bit of boiled beef and some strawberries and cream. He pondered a good deal during the afternoon, and at one time it seemed to him that he had been eating nothing but boiled beef for weeks, and at other times it seemed that he must have been living on strawberries and cream for years. Neither the beef nor the strawberries and cream seemed happy either. It seemed discontented-like. At 6 they came and told him dinner was ready. The announcement aroused no enthusiasm within him, but he felt that there was some of that £2.5 to be worked off, and he held on to ropes and things and went down. A pleasant odour of onions and hot ham mingled with fried fish and greens greeted him at the bottom of the ladder, and then the steward came up with an oily smile and said, "What can I get you, sir?" "Get me out of this," was the feeble reply, and they ran him up quick and propped him up over to leeward and left him. For the next 4 days he lived a simple and blameless life on thin captain's biscuits. I mean that the biscuits were thin, not the captain. And soda water. I believe captain's biscuits are actually hardtack, or a form of hardtack. Not the most palatable thing. But towards Saturday he got uppish, and went in for weak tea and dry toast, and on Monday he was gorging himself on chicken broth. He left the ship on Tuesday, and as it steamed away from the landing stage, he gazed after it regretfully. "There she goes," he said. "There she goes with £2 worth of food on board that belongs to me, and that I haven't had." He said that if they had given him another day, he thought he could have put it straight. So I set my face against the sea trip. Not, as I explained, upon my own account. I was never queer. They mean something else in this case. But I was afraid for George. George said he should be all right, and would rather like it, but he would advise Harris and me not to think of it, as he felt sure we would both be ill. Harris said that to himself it was always a mystery how people managed to get sick at sea. Said he thought people must do it on purpose, from affection. Said he had often wished to be, but had never been able. Then he told us anecdotes of how he had gone across the channel when it was so rough that the passengers had to be tied into their berths, and he and the captain were the only 2 living souls on board who were not ill. Sometimes it was he and the second mate who were not ill, but it was generally he and one other man. If not he and another man, then it was he by himself. It is a curious fact, but nobody ever is seasick on land. At sea you come across plenty of people very bad indeed, whole boatloads of them, but I never met a man yet on land who was ever known at all when it was to be seasick. Where the 1,000 upon thousands of bad sailors that swam in every ship hide themselves when they are on land is a mystery. I actually have never been seasick. I have been on water, but I never have gotten seasick. I guess I'm lucky. Horace here, though. Horace. Let me tell you about Horace here. Horace, he can barely stand a ship. Okay, I'll be quiet. Okay, I'm sorry, Horace. I didn't mean to insult you. I just thought it would be a funny story. Okay, never mind. Anyway, Cool Skeleton, don't talk bad about Horace. I would never talk bad about Horace. I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, okay, I'll apologize to you after the stream, Horace. Of course I will. If most men were like a fellow I saw on the Yarmouth boat one day, I could account for the seeming enigma easily enough. It was just off Southend Pier, I recollect, and he was leaning on through one of the portholes in a very dangerous position. I went up to him to try and save him. "Hi, come further in," I said, shaking him by the shoulder. "You'll be overboard." "Oh my, I wish I was the only answer I could get, and there I had to leave him. 3 weeks afterwards I met him in the coffee room of a Bath hotel, talking about his voyages, and explaining with enthusiasm how he loved the sea. "Good sailor," he replied in answer to a mild young man's envious query. "Well, I did feel a little queer once, I confess." Again, they mean something a little different. "It was off Cape Horn. The vessel was wrecked the next morning." I said, "Weren't you a little shaky by Southend Pier one day, and wanted to be thrown overboard?" "Southend Pier?" he replied with a puzzled expression. "Yes, going down to Yarmouth last Friday, 3 weeks." "Oh, yes," he answered, brightening up. "I remember now. I did have a headache that afternoon. It was the pickles, you know. They were the most disgraceful pickles I ever tasted in a respectable boat. Did you have any?" "For myself, I have discovered an excellent preventative against seasickness in balancing myself. You stand in the center of the deck, and as the ship heaves and pitches, you move your body about so as to keep it always straight. When the front of the ship rises, you lean forward till the deck almost touches your nose, and when its back end gets up, you lean backwards. This is all very well for an hour or two, but you can't balance yourself for a week." George said, "Let's go up the river." He said we should have fresh air, exercise, and quiet. The constant change of scene would occupy our minds, including what there was of Harris's, and the hard work would give us a good appetite and make us sleep well. Harris said he didn't think George ought to do anything that would have a tendency to make him sleepier than he always was, as it might be dangerous. He said he didn't very well understand how George was going to sleep any more than he did now, seeing that there were only 24 hours in each day, summer and winter alike, but thought that if he did sleep any more, he might just as well be dead, and so save his board and lodging. Harris said, however, that the river would suit him to a T. I don't know what a tea is, except a sixpenny one, which includes bread and butter and cake ad lib, and is cheap at the price if you haven't had any dinner. It seemed to suit everybody, however, which is greatly to its credit. It suited me to a T too, and Harris and I both said it was a good idea of George's, and we said it in a tone that seemed to somehow imply that we were surprised that George should have come out so sensible. The only one who was not struck with the suggestion was Montmorency. He never did care for the river, did Montmorency. "It's all very well for you fellows," he says. "You like it, but I don't. There's nothing for me to do. Scenery is not in my line, and I don't smoke. If I see a rat, you won't stop, and if I go to sleep, you get fooling about with the boat, and slop me overboard. If you ask me, I call the whole thing bully foolishness." We were 3-1, however, and the motion was carried. Get another little drink. If I recall, some of the anecdotes that Jerome includes in this are also based off real stories that he heard and real experiences that he had. um, which makes it quite interesting. Let's be honest. I mean, some of this stuff, who couldn't relate to it? I mean the whole hypochondriac thing itself. Chapter 2. We pulled out the map and discussed plans. We arranged to start on the following Saturday from Kingston. Harris and I would go down in the morning and take the boat up to Chertsey, and George, who would not be able to get away from the city till the afternoon. George goes to sleep at a bank from 10 to 4 each day. Except Saturdays, where they wake him up and put him outside at 2. Would meet us there. That's an interesting way to describe work. George and I, yeah. Should we camp out or sleep at inns? George and I were for camping out. We said it would be so wild and free, so patriarchal-like. Slowly the golden memory of the dead sun fades from the hearts of the cold and sad clouds. Silent like sorrowing children, the birds have ceased their songs, and only the moorhen's plaintive cry and the harsh croak of the corncrake stirs the odd hush around the couch of waters, where the dying day breathes out her last. So I think this part is one of the more serious parts that he actually originally wrote in. So you'll hear how the language changes just a little bit. From the dim woods on either bank, night's ghostly army, the grey shadows creep out with noiseless tread to chase away the lingering rearguard of the light, and pass with noiseless, unseen feet above the waving river grass. Through the and through the sighing rushes, and night upon her sombre throne folds her black wings above the darkening world, and from a phantom palace lit by the pale stars reigns in stillness. Oh, this is quite poetic, actually. Then we run our little boat into some quiet nook, and the tent is pitched, and the frugal supper cooked and eaten. Then the big pipes are filled and lighted, and the pleasant chat goes round in musical undertones, while, in the pauses of our talk, the river, playing round the boat, prattles strange old tales and secrets, sings low the old... Where was I? Sings low the old child's song that it has sung so many thousand years, will sing so many thousand years to come, before its voice grows harsh and old. A song that we, who have learned to love its changing face, who have so often nested on its yielding bosom, think somehow we understand, though we could not tell you in mere words the story that we listened to. Yes, this part's definitely from one of the serious writing sections that he was working on when he first wrote this book. And we sit there by its margin while the moon, who loves it too, stoops down to kiss it with a sister's kiss, and throws her silver arms around it cleaningly, and we watch it as it flows, ever singing, ever whispering out to meet its king, the sea, till our voices die away in silence, and the pipes go out, till we commonplace, everyday young men enough feel strangely full of thoughts, half sad, half sweet, and do not care or want to speak, till we laugh, and rising knock the ashes from our burnt-out pipes, and say, "Good night," and lulled by the lapping water and the rustling trees, we fall asleep beneath the great still stars, and dream that the world is young again, young and sweet as she used to be, ere the centuries of fret and care had furrowed her fair face, ere her children's sins and follies had made old her loving heart. Sweet as she was in those bygone days, when a new-made mother, she nursed us, her children, upon her own deep breast. Oh my. Ere the wiles of painted civilization had lured us away from her fond arms, and the poisoned sneers of artificiality had made us ashamed of the simple life we led with her, and the simple stately home where mankind was born so many thousands of years ago. Harris said, How about when it rains? When it rained? You can never rouse Harris. There is no poetry about Harris, no wild yearning for the unattainable. Harris never weeps, he knows not why. If Harris's eyes fill with tears, you can bet it is because Harris has been... Give me a moment, sorry. If Harris's eyes fill with tears, you can bet it is because Harris has been eating raw onions, or has put too much Worcester over his chop. If you were to stand at night by the seashore with Harris and say, "Hark, do you not hear? Is it but the mermaids singing deep below the waving waters, or sad spirits, chanting dirges for white corpses held by seaweed?" Harris would take you by the arm and say, "I know what it is, old man. You've got a chill. Now you come along with me. I know a place round the corner here where you can get a drop of the finest Scotch whiskey you ever tasted. Put you right in less than no time." I know a few people like Harris. You're trying to be poetic. You're trying to be thoughtful. You're thinking deep outside, looking out into the waters, thinking the most amazingly poetic thoughts you could think, and then they somehow come up with the most mundane answer to your questions ever and just kill the whole mood. I mean, Horace, you are not like that. Neither is Ovid and Virgil, but I have known some people like that. And I'm sure some of you might know others like that as well. Harris always does know a place around the corner where you can get something brilliant in the drinking line. Cool Skeleton, I kind of am that person. I'm sorry, Cool Skeleton, I meant no insult, but yeah. Oh dear. Harris always does know a place around the corner where you can get something brilliant in the drinking line. I believe that if you met Harris up in paradise, supposing such a thing likely, he would immediately greet you with, "So glad that you've come, old fellows. I've found a nice place around the corner here where you can get some really first-class nectar." In the present instance, however, as regarded the camping out, his practical view of the matter came as a very timely hint. Camping out in rainy weather is not pleasant. It is evening. You are wet through, and there's a good 2 inches of water in the boat, and all the things are damp. You find a place on the banks that is not quite so puddly as other places you have seen, and you land and lug out the tent, and 2 of you proceed to fix it. It is soaked and heavy, and it flops about and tumbles down on you and clings round your head and makes you mad. The rain is pouring steadily down all the time, and it is difficult enough to fix a tent in dry weather. In wet the task becomes Herculean. Instead of helping you, it seems to you that the other man is simply playing the fool. Just as you get your side beautifully fixed, he gives it a hoist from his end and spoils it all. "Here, what are you up to?" you call out. "What are you up to?" he retorts. "Let go, can't you?" "Don't pull it, you've got it all wrong, you stupid ass," you shout. "No, I haven't," he yells back. "Let go your side." "I tell you, you've got it all wrong," you roar, wishing that you could get at him, and you give your ropes a lug that pulls all his pegs out. "Ah, the bally idiot," you hear him mutter to himself, and then comes a savage haul, and away goes your side. You lay down the mallet and start to go round and tell him what you think about the whole business. Cool Skull, yes! Oh my goodness, yes, this sort of situation. And tell him what you think about the whole business. At the same time, he starts round in the same directions to come and explains his views to you. And you follow each other round and round, swearing at one another until the tent tumbles down in a heap and leaves you looking at each other across its ruins. And then you both indignantly exclaim in the same breath, "There you are! What did I tell you?" Meanwhile, the third man, who has been bailing out the boat, and who has spilled the water down his sleeve, and has been cursing away to himself steadily for the last 10 minutes, wants to know what the thundering blazes you're playing at, and while the... Give me a second. Oh, hello there, Sophia, welcome. Give me a second. I try to get this next line. I'll go back for the start. Meanwhile, the third man, who's been bailing out the boat and has spilled the water down his sleeve, has been cursing away to himself steadily for the last 10 minutes, wants to know what the thundering blazes you're playing at, and why the blarb tent isn't up yet. At last, somehow or other, it does get up, and you land the things. Oh, hello there! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Hello there, Cat Kings! Welcome! Thank you for the raid! Oh my goodness! Thank you for the raid! Oh wow! Oh, let me introduce myself. I am Matsu Quinox, interdimensional omniversal librarian. This is Horace, and I am a I do gaming streams on Tuesday, reading streams on Thursday, and today we are reading a book, Three Men in a Boat to Say Nothing. Three Men of a Boat to Say Nothing. What is the word? I'm out of breath. I'm kind of like, oh my goodness. We are reading Three Men in a Boat to Say Nothing of the Dog, a Victorian humorous vacation guide, essentially. And we are just getting to the point where they're talking about trying to set up a tent in the rain. Let me get a drink of water quick. Oh my goodness. I was laughing too hard at the last... Oh my goodness. It's wonderful to have you all here. So sit back, have yourself a nice hot or cold drink, some snacks, and just enjoy. Cool Skeleton, Three Men in a Boat to Say Nothing of the Dog. Yes, that is the title of the... And, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to do all these welcomes. Okay. Welcome, GGQ19. Welcome, Steve Kelvra XD. Welcome, Cat Kings. Welcome... Oh my goodness. I got so many people to welcome. Oh my goodness. Welcome you all. You can call me Q. Oh yes, yes, yes. Welcome Q. Welcome, welcome, welcome all. And I hope you enjoy the reading. Also, I will explain, I read in voices. I do voice acting for the readings. So right now I'm doing a bit of a British accent for this. Oh my goodness. At last, somehow or other, it does get up, and you land the things, and it is hopeless attempting to make a wood fire. So, you light the method... Oh, hold on. Let me do a shout out. There you go. Giving a shout out to Cat Kings. Thank you for the raid. Aw, well, glad to have you here, Q. For as short as you can. Glad you could come. I'm always glad to have everyone come. Cat, take a deep breath. LOL, you're good. I'm excited here. Oh, good. Q, I suggested you. Well, I'm honored and thankful you suggested me. Thank you so much. 20, come back next time. Yes, come back next time. The doors to the study are always open. At last, somehow or other, it does get up, and you land the things. It is hopeless attempting to make a wood fire, so you light the methylated spirit stove and crowd round that. Rainwater is the chief article of diet at supper. The bread is 2/3 rainwater. The beefsteak pie is exceedingly rich in it, and the jam and the butter and the salt and the coffee have all combined with it to make soup. After supper, you find your tobacco is damp, and you cannot smoke. Luckily, you have a bottle of the stuff that cheers and inebriates, if taken in proper quantity, and this restores to you sufficient interest in life to induce you to go to bed. There you dream that an elephant has suddenly sat down on your chest, and that the volcano has exploded and thrown you down to the bottom of the sea. The elephant is still sleeping peacefully on your bosom. You wake up and grasp the idea that something terrible really has happened. Your first impression is that the end of the world has come. Then you think that this cannot be, and that it is thieves and murderers, or else fire, and this opinion you express in the usual method. No help comes, however, and all you know is that thousands of people are kicking you, and you are being smothered. Somebody else seems in trouble too. You can hear his faint cries coming from underneath your bed. Determining in all events to sell your life dearly, you struggle frantically, hitting out right and left with your arms and legs and yelling lustily the while, and at last something gives way, and you find your head in the fresh air. 2 feet off, you dimly observe a half-dressed ruffian, waiting to kill you, and you are preparing for a life-and-death struggle with him, when it begins to dawn on you that it's Jim. "Oh, it's you, is it?" he says, recognizing you at the same moment. "Yes," you answer, rubbing your eyes. "What happened?" "Bally tent's blown down, I think," he says. "Where's Bill?" Then you both raise up your voices and shout for "Bill!" and the ground beneath you heaves and rocks, and the muffled voice that you heard before replies from out of the ruin, "Get off my head, can't you?" Private Maverick, ruffian? Well, wait, wrong kind. Yes, not those kind of ruffians. And Bill struggles out a muddy, trampled wreck, and in an unnecessarily aggressive mood, he being under the evident belief that the whole thing has been done on purpose. In the morning you are all three speechless, owing to having caught severe colds in the night. You also feel very quarrelsome, and you swear at each other in hoarse whispers during the whole of breakfast time. We therefore decided that we would sleep out on fine nights, and hotel it, and inn it, and pub it, like respectable folks, when it was wet or when we felt inclined for a change. Montmorency hailed this compromise with much approval. He does not revel in romantic solitude. Give him something noisy, and if a trifle low, so much the jollier. To look at Montmorency, you would imagine that he was an angel, sent upon the earth, for some reason withheld from mankind, in the shape of a small fox terrier. By the way, Montmorency is the dog. There's a sort of, "Oh, what a wicked world this is, but how I wish I could do something to make it better and nobler" expression about Montmorency that has been known to bring the tears into the eyes of pious old ladies and gentlemen. When first he came to live at my expense, I never thought I should be able to get him to stop long. I used to sit down and look at him, as he sat on the rug and looked up at me, and think, "Oh, that dog will never live. He'll be snatched up to the bright skies in a chariot. That is what will happen to him." But when I had paid for about a dozen chickens that he had killed, and had dragged him growling and kicking by the scruff of his neck out of 114 street fights, and had a dead cat brought round for my inspection by an irate female who called me a murderer, and had been summoned by the man next door but for one for having a ferocious dog at large, that had kept him pinned up in his own tool shed, afraid to venture his nose outside the door, for over 2 hours on a cold night, and had learned that the gardener, unknown to myself, had won 30 shillings by backing him to kill rats against time. And then I began to think that maybe they'd let him remain on earth for a bit longer, after all. To hang about a stable and collect a gang of the most disreputable dogs to be found in the town, and lead them out to march round the slums to fight other disreputable dogs, is Montmorency's idea of life. And so, as I before observed, he gave to the suggestion of inns and pubs and hotels his most emphatic approbation. Having thus settled the sleeping arrangements to the satisfaction of all 4 of us, the only thing left to discuss was what we should take with us, and this we had begun to argue, when Harris said he'd had enough oratory for one night, and proposed that we should go out and have a smile, saying that he had found a place, round by the square, where you could really get a drop of Irish worth drinking. There's Harris again. Always around the corner, apparently. George said he felt thirsty. I never knew George when he didn't. And as I had a presentiment that a little whiskey warm with a slice of lemon would do my complaint good. The debate was, by common assent, adjourned to the following night, and the assembly put on its hats and went out. Another little hydration. I could not keep a straight face during that um, bit with the tent. I will admit I've read a little bit of this book, but I haven't read all of it. So that bit with the tent took me off guard. And here in the study, there is in one of the forest rooms. I did try to set up a tent once in a storm. I have slept through a storm in the forest room. It's quite an experience, I can tell you that. And yes, you do often get soaked. I'm sorry, I'm starting to pre-laugh at this point for this chapter. I just saw the description of it. Chapter 3. Sophia Ignacy, this story is good. Oh, you have not gotten to some of the best parts yet. So, on the following evening, we again assembled, to discuss and arrange our plans. Harris said, "Now, the first thing to settle is what to take with us. Now you get a bit of paper and write down, Jay. And you get the grocery catalogue, George, and somebody give me a bit of pencil, and then I'll make out a list." That's Harris all over, so ready to take the burden of everything himself and put it on the backs of other people. He always reminds me of my poor Uncle Podger. You never saw such a commotion up and down a house in your life, as when my Uncle Podger undertook to do a job. A picture would have come home from the frame makers, and be standing in the dining room waiting to be put up, and Aunt Podger would ask what was to be done with it, and Uncle Podger would say, "Oh, you leave that to me. Don't you any of you worry yourself about that. I'll do all of that." And then he would take off his coat and begin. He would send the girl out for 6 pennyworth of nails, and then one of the boys after her to tell her what size to get, and from that he would gradually work down and start the whole house. "Now you go and get my hammer, Will," he would shout, "and bring me the rule, Tom, and I shall want the step-ladder, and I had better have a kitchen chair too, and Jim, you run round to Mr. Goggles and tell him Pa's kind regards and hopes his leg's better, and will he lend him his spirit level. And don't you, Maria, because I shall want somebody to hold me the light. And when the girl comes back, she must go out again for a bit of picture cord. And Tom, where's Tom? Tom, you come here. I shall want you to hand me up the picture." And then he would lift up the picture and drop it, and it would come out of the frame, and he would try to save the glass and cut himself. And then he would spring round the room, looking for his handkerchief. He could not find his handkerchief, because it was in the pocket of the coat he had taken off. Cool Skull, Jim, better watch out for Long John Silver. Yes! It was like, he could not find his handkerchief, because it was in the pocket of the coat he had taken off, and he did not know where he had put the coat, and all the house had to leave off looking for his tools and start looking for his coat, while he would dance round and hinder them. "Doesn't anybody in the whole house know where my coat is? I never came across such a set in all my life. Upon my word, I didn't. 6 of you. You can't find a coat that I put down not 5 minutes ago. Well, of all the—" Then he'd get up and find that he had been sitting on it, and would call out, "Oh, you can give it up. I've found it myself now. Might just as well ask the cat to find anything as expect you people to find it." I've encountered one person in my existence, my very long billion-year existence, that is quite like Uncle Podger here. And when half an hour had been spent in tying up his finger, and a new glass had been got, and the tools and the ladder and the chair and the candle had been brought, he would have another go, the whole family, including the girl, and the charwoman standing round in a semicircle ready to help. 2 people would have to hold the chair, and a third would help him put on it and hold him there, and a fourth would hand him a nail, and a fifth would pass him up the hammer, and he would take hold of the nail and drop it. "There," he would say in an injured tone, "now the nail's gone." And we would all have to go down on our knees and grovel for it, while he would stand on the chair and grunt and want to know if he was to be kept there all the evening. The nail would be found at last, but by that time he would have lost the hammer. "Where's the hammer? What did I do with the hammer? Great heavens, 7 of you cascaping round there, and you don't know what I did with the hammer." I'm sorry. We would find the hammer for him, and then he would have lost sight of the mark he had made on the wall, where the nail was to go, and then each of us had to get up on the chair beside him and see if we could find it, and we would each discover it in a different place. And he would call us all fools one after another and tell us to get down. And he would take the rule and remeasure and find that he wanted half 31 3/8 inches from the corner, and we would try to do it in his head and go mad. And we would all try to do it in our heads, and all arrive at different results, and sneer at one another, and in the general row the original number would be forgotten, and Uncle Podger would have to measure it again. He would use a bit of string this time, and at the critical moment when the old fool was leaning over the chair at an angle of 45 and trying to reach a point 30 inches beyond what was possible for him to reach, the string would slip, and down he would slide onto the piano, a really fine musical effect being produced by the suddenness with which his head and body struck all the notes at the same time. Oh my goodness. And Aunt Maria would say that she would not allow the children to stand round and hear such language. At last Uncle Podge would get the spot fixed again and put the point of the nail on it with his left hand, and take the hammer in his right hand. I think we all know what's going to happen next. And with the first blow, he would smash his thumb, and drop the hammer with a yell on somebody's toes. Aunt Maria would mildly observe that next time Uncle Podger was going to hammer a nail into the wall, she hoped he'd let her know in time, that she could make arrangements to go and spend a week with her mother while it was being done. "Oh, you women, you make such a fuss over everything," Uncle Podger would reply, picking himself up. "Why, I like doing a little job of this sort." And then he would have another try, and at the second blow the nail would go clean through the plaster, and have the hammer after it, and Uncle Podger be precipitated against the wall with force nearly sufficient to flatten his nose. Then we had to find the rule and the string again, and a new hole was made, and about midnight the picture would be up, very crooked and insecure, the wall for yards round looking as if it had been smoothed down with a rake, and everybody dead-beat and wretched, except Uncle Podger. "There you are," he would say, stepping heavily off the chair onto the charwoman's corns and surveying the mess he had made with evident pride. "Why, some people would have had a man in to do a little thing like that." Oh my goodness. Harris will be just that sort of man when he grows up, I know, and I told him so. I said I could not permit him to take so much labor upon himself. I said, "Now, you get the paper and the pencil and the catalogue, and George write down and I'll do the work." The first list we made out had to be discarded. It was clear that the upper reaches of the Thames would not allow of the navigation of a boat sufficiently large to take the things we had set down as the... Excuse me? It was clear that the upper reaches of the Thames would not allow of the navigation of a boat sufficiently large to take the things we had set down as indispensable, so we tore the list up and looked at one another. George said, You know, we are on the wrong track altogether. We must not think of the things we could do with, but only of the things we can't do without." George comes out really quite sensible at times. You'd be surprised. I call that downright wisdom, not merely as regards the present case, but with reference to our trip up the river of life generally. How many people on that voyage load up the boat till it is in danger of swamping with store of foolish things, which they think essential to the pleasure and comfort of the trip, but which are really only useless lumber. How they pile the poor little craft mast high, with fine clothes and big houses, with useless servants, and a host of swell friends that do not care twopence for them, and that they do not care three halfpence for, with expensive entertainments that nobody enjoys, with formalities and fashions, with pretence and ostentation, and with, oh heaviest, maddest lumber of all, the dread of what will my neighbour think, with luxuries that only cloy, with pleasures that bore, with empty show that, like the criminal's iron crown of yore, makes to bleed and swoon the aching head that wears it. It is lumber, man, all lumber. Throw it overboard. It makes the boat so heavy to pull, you nearly faint at the oars. It makes it so cumbersome and dangerous to manage, you never know a moment's freedom from anxiety and care. Never gain a moment's rest for dreamy laziness. No time to watch the windy shadows skimming lightly over the shallows, or the glittering sunbeams flitting in and out among the ripples, or the great trees by the margin looking down at their own image, or the woods all green and golden, or the lilies white and yellow, or the sombre waving rushes, or the sedges, or the orchids, or the blue forget-me-nots. Throw the lumber over, man. Let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need. A homely home and simple pleasures, one or two friends, worth the name. Someone to love and someone to love you. A cat, a dog, and a pipe or two. Enough to eat and enough to wear, and a little more than enough to drink, for thirst is a dangerous thing. You will find the boat easier to pull then, and it will not be so liable to upset. It will not matter so much if it does upset. Good plain merchandise will stand water. You will have time to think as well as to work, time to drink in life's sunshine, time to listen to the alonian music that is the wind of God draws from the human heartstrings around us, time to... I beg your pardon, really. I quite forgot. Well, we left the list to George, and he began it. I really loved some of this text. I need to get another drink. We won't take a tent, suggested George. We won't take a tent, suggested George. I sometimes forget whose voice is who. We will have a boat with a cover. It is ever so much simpler and more comfortable. It seemed a good thought, and we adopted it. I do not know whether you have ever seen the thing I mean. You fix iron hoops up over the boat and stretch a huge canvas over them, and fasten it down all round from stem to stern, and it converts the boat into a sort of little house. It is beautifully cozy, though a trifle stuffy, but then everything has its drawbacks, as the man said when his mother-in-law died, and then came down upon him for the funeral expenses. Oh, that's pretty cold. George said that in that case we must take a rug each, a lamp, some soap, a brush and comb, between us, a toothbrush each, a basin, some tooth powder, some shaving tackle, sounds like a French exercise, doesn't it? And a couple of big towels for bathing. I notice that people always make gigantic arrangements for bathing when they are going anywhere near the water, but that they don't bathe much when they are there. It is the same when you go to the seaside. I always determine, when thinking over the matter in London, that I'll get up early every morning and go and have a dip before breakfast, and I religiously pack up a pair of drawers and a bath towel. I always get red bathing drawers. I rather fancy myself in red drawers. They suit my complexion so. But when I get to the sea, I don't feel somehow that I want that early morning bathe really so much as I did when I was in town. On the contrary, I feel more that I want to stop in bed till the last moment, and then come down and have my breakfast. Once or twice virtue has triumphed, and I have got out at 6:30 dressed myself, and have taken my drawers and towel and stumbled dismally off. But I haven't enjoyed it. They seem to keep especially cutting east wind waiting for me when I go to bathe in the other morning. And they pick out all the three-cornered stones and put them on the top. And they sharpen up the rocks and cover the points over with a bit of sand so that I can't see them. And they take the sea and put it 2 miles out, so that I have to huddle myself up in my arms and hop shivering through 6 inches of water. When I do get to the sea, it is rough and quite insulting. One huge wave catches me up and chucks me in a sitting posture as hard as ever it can, down onto a rock which has been put there for me. And before I've said, "Oh, ugh," and found out what has gone, the wave comes back and carries me out to mid-ocean. I begin to strike out frantically for the shore and wonder if I shall ever see home and friends again, and wish I'd been kinder to my little sister when a boy. When I was a boy, I mean. Just when I have been given up all hope, a wave retires and leaves me sprawling like a starfish on the sand, and I get up and look back and find that I've been swimming for my life in 2 feet of water. I hop back and dress and crawl home, where I have to pretend I liked it. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm really loving Jerome K. Jerome's writing. In the present instance, we all talked as if we were going to have a long swim every morning. George said it was so pleasant to wake up in the boat in the fresh morning and plunge in the limpid river. Harris said there was nothing like a swim before breakfast to give you an appetite. He said it always gave him an appetite. George said that if it was going to make Harris eat more than Harris ordinarily ate, then he should protest against Harris having a bath at all. He said there would be quite enough hard work in towing sufficient food for Harris up against stream as it was. I urged upon George, however, how much pleasanter it would be to have Harris clean and fresh about the boat, even if we did have to take a few more hundredweight of provisions, and he got to see it in my light, and withdrew his opposition to Harris's bath. Agreed finally that we should take 3 bath towels, so as not to keep each other waiting. For clothes, George said 2 suits of flannel would be sufficient, as we could wash them ourselves in the river when they got dirty. We asked him if he had ever tried washing flannels in the river, and he replied, "Oh, who's talking? Oh, George. No, not exactly himself like, but he knew some fellows who had, and it was easy enough." And Harris and I were weak enough to fancy he knew what he was talking about, and that 3 respectable young men without position or influence, and with no experience in washing, could really clean their own shirts and trousers in the river Thames with a bit of soap. We were to learn in the days to come, when it was too late, that George was a miserable impostor, who could evidently have known nothing whatever about the matter. If you had seen these clothes after, but as the shilling shockers say, we anticipate. George impressed upon us to take a change of underthings and plenty of socks, in case we got upset and wanted to change, and also plenty of handkerchiefs, as they would do to wipe things, and a pair of leather boots, as well as our boating shoes, as we should want them if we got upset. Okay. I think we have time for one more chapter. What say you, my dear scholars? Shall we do one more chapter? I always like to have, for everyone new in the stream, I always like to have my dear wonderful scholars to help me decide on some of these things. After all, this story is for you. Alright, Maverick, one more sounds good. Alright, let me get some hydration in me again. Oh my goodness. Okay. Chapter 4. Then we discussed the food question. George said, Begin with breakfast. George is so practical. Now for breakfast, we shall want a frying pan. Harris said it was indispensable, but we merely urged him not to be an ass, and George went on. A teapot, and a kettle, and a methylated spirit stove. No, no oil, said George. Yeah, trying to get George's voice again. No oil, said George with a significant look, and Harris and I agreed. No oil. Oh, was George spoke. I'm getting so mixed up. No oil, said George with a significant look, and Harris and I agreed. We had taken up an oil stove once, but never again. It had been like living in an oil shop that week. It oozed. I never saw such a thing as paraffin oil is to ooze. We kept it in the nose of the boat, and from there it oozed down to the rudder, impregnating the whole boat and everything in it on its way. It oozed over the river and saturated the scenery and spoilt the atmosphere. Sometimes a westerly, oily wind blew, and at other times an easterly, oily wind, and sometimes it blew a northerly, oily wind, and maybe a southerly, oily wind. But whether it came from the Arctic snows or was raised in the wastes or the desert sands, it came alike to us, laden with the fragrance of paraffin oil. And that oil oozed up and ruined the sunset, and as for the moonbeams, they positively reeked of paraffin. We tried to get away from it at Marlow. We left the boat by the bridge and took a walk through the town to escape it, but it followed us. The whole town was full of oil. We passed through the churchyard, and it seemed as if the people had been buried in oil. The high streets stank of oil. We wondered how people could live in it, and we walked miles upon miles out Birmingham way, but it was no use. The country was steeped in oil. At the end of that trip, we met together at midnight, in a lonely field, under a blasted oak, and took an awful oath. We had been swearing for a whole week about the thing in an ordinary middle-class way, but this was a swell affair. An awful oath never to take paraffin oil with us in a boat again, except, of course, in case of sickness. Therefore, in the present instance, we confined ourselves to methylated spirit. Even that is bad enough. You get methylated pie and methylated cake, but methylated spirit is more wholesome when taken into the system in large quantities than paraffin oil. For other breakfast things, George suggested eggs and bacon, which was easy to cook, cold meat, tea, bread and butter, and jam. For lunch, he said we could have biscuits, cold meat, bread and butter, and jam, but no cheese. What? Really? Cheese, like oil, makes too much of itself. It wants the whole boat to itself. It goes through the hamper and gives a cheesy flavor to whatever else there. You can't tell whether you are eating apple pie or German sausage or strawberries and cream. It all seems cheese. There's too much odor about cheese. Look, any number of those things would be great combined with cheese. I don't understand why they're complaining. I remember a friend of mine buying a couple of cheeses at Liverpool. Splendid cheeses they were, ripe and mellow, and with a 200 horsepower scent about them that might have been warranted to carry 3 miles. Ah, that's why. Where was I? And knock a man over at 200 yards. I was in Liverpool at the time, and my friend said that if I didn't mind, he would get me to take them back with me to London, as he should not be coming up for a day or two himself, and did not think the cheeses ought to be kept much longer. "Oh, with pleasure, dear boy," I replied, "with pleasure." I called for the cheeses and took them away in a cab. It was a ramshackle affair, dragged along by a knock-kneed, broken-winded somnambulist, which his owner, in a moment of enthusiasm during conversation, referred to as a horse. I put the cheeses on the top, and we started off at a shamble that would have done credit to the swiftest steamroller ever built, and all went merry at a funeral bell, until we turned a corner. Then the wind carried a whiff from the cheeses full on our steed. It woke him up, and with a snort of terror he dashed off at 3 miles an hour. The wind still blew in his direction, and before he reached the end of the street he was laying himself out at the rate of nearly 4 miles an hour, leaving the cripples and stout old ladies simply nowhere. It took 2 porters as well as the driver to hold him in at the station, and I do not think they would have done it, even then, had not one of the men had the presence of mind to put a handkerchief over his nose and to light a bit of brown paper. I took my ticket and marched proudly up the platform, with my cheeses, the people falling back respectively on either side. The train was crowded, and I had to get into a carriage where there were already 7 other people. One crusty old gentleman objected, but I got in, notwithstanding, and putting my cheeses upon the rack, squeezed down with a pleasant smile, and said it was a warm day. A few moments passed, and then the old gentleman began to fidget. "Very close in here," he said. "Quite oppressive," said the man next to him, and then they both began sniffing, and at the 3rd sniff they caught it right on the chest, and rose up without another word and went out. And then a stout lady got up and said it was disgraceful that a respectable married woman should be harried about in this way, and gathered up a bag and 8 parcels and went. The remaining 4 passengers sat on for a while, until a solemn-looking man in the corner, who from his dress and general appearance seemed to belong to the undertaker class, said it put him in mind of a dead baby. Oh my goodness. And the other 3 passengers tried to get out of the door at the same time and hurt themselves. I smiled at the black gentleman, and said I thought we were going to have the carriage to ourselves, and he laughed pleasantly and said that some people made such a fuss over a little thing. But even he grew strangely depressed after we had started, and so when we reached Crewe, I asked him to come and have a drink. He accepted, and we forced our way into the buffet, where we yelled and stamped and waved our umbrellas for a quarter of an hour, and then a young lady came and asked us if we wanted anything. "What's yours?" I said, turning to my friend. "I'll have half a crown's worth of brandy, neat, if you please, miss," he responded. And he went off quietly after he had drunk it, and got into another carriage, which I thought mean. From Crewe I had the compartment to myself, though the train was crowded. As we drew up at the different stations, the people, seeing my empty carriage, would rush for it. "Here you are, Maria! Come along, plenty of room! All right, Tom, we'll get in here!" they would shout, and they would run along, carrying heavy bags, and fight round the door to get in first. And one would open the door and mount the steps and stagger back into the arms of the man behind him, and they would all come and have a sniff, and then drop off and squeeze into other carriages, or pay the difference and go first. From Euston I took the cheeses down to my friend's house, when his wife came into the room, and she smelt round for an instant. Then she said, "What is it? Tell me the worst." I said, "It's cheeses. Tom bought them in Liverpool, and asked me to bring them with me." And I added that I hoped she understood that it had nothing to do with me, and that she said that she was sure of that, but that she would speak to Tom about it when he came back. My friend was detained in Liverpool longer than he expected, and 3 days later, as he hadn't returned, his wife called on me. She said, "What did Tom say about those cheeses?" I replied that he had directed they were to be kept in a moist place, and that no one was to touch them. She said, "Nobody's likely to touch them. Had he smelt them?" I thought he had, and added he seemed greatly attached to them. "You think he would be upset," she queried, "if I gave a man a sovereign to take them away and bury them?" I answered that I thought he would never smile again. An idea struck her. She said, "Do you mind keeping them for him? Let me send them round to you." "Madam," I replied, "for myself I like the smell of cheese, and the journey the other day with them from Liverpool I shall ever look back upon as a happy ending to a pleasant holiday. But in this world we must consider others. The lady under whose roof I have the honour of residing is a widow, and for all I know, possibly an orphan too. She has a strong, I may say an eloquent objection to being what she terms put upon. The presence of your husband's cheese in her house she would, I instinctively feel, regard as a put upon, and it shall never be said that I put upon the widow and the orphan. Very well, then, said my friend's wife, rising. All I have to say is that I shall take the children and go to a hotel until those cheeses are eaten. I decline to live any longer in the same house with them. She kept her word, leaving the place in charge of the charwoman, who, when asked if she could stand the smell, replied, "What smell?" and who, when taken close to the cheese and told to sniff hard, said she could detect a faint odor of melons. It was argued from this that little injury could result to the woman from the atmosphere, and she was left. Oh, jeez. The hotel bill came to 15 guineas, and my friend, after reckoning everything up, found that the cheeses had cost him 8 and 6 a pound. He said he dearly loved a bit of cheese, but it was beyond his means, so he determined to get rid of them. Oh my, really? After all that trouble, he wants to get rid of the cheeses. He threw them into the canal, but had to fish them out again as the bargemen complained. They said it made them feel quite faint, and after that he took them one dark night and left them in the parish mortuary. But the coroner discovered them and made a fearful fuss. He said it was a plot to deprive him of his living by waking up the corpses. My friend got rid of them at last by taking them down to a seaside town and burying them on the beach. It gained the place quite a reputation. Visitors said they had never noticed before how strong the air was, and weak-chested and consumptive people used to throng there for years afterwards. Fond as I am of cheese, therefore, I hold that George was right in declining to take any. "You shan't want any tea," said George. Harris's face fell at this. "But we'll have a good round, square slap-up meal at 7. Dinner, tea, and supper combined." Harris grew more cheerful. George suggested meat and fruit pies, cold meat, tomatoes, fruit, and green stuff. For drink we took some wonderfully sticky concoction of Harris's, which you mixed with water and called lemonade, plenty of tea, and a bottle of whiskey, in case, as George said, we got upset. It seemed to me that George harped too much on the getting upset idea. It seemed to me the wrong spirit to go about the trip in, but I'm glad we took the whiskey. We said that we didn't take beer or wine. They are a mistake up the river. They make you feel sleepy and heavy. A glass in the evening when you are doing a mooch round the town and looking at the girls is all right enough, but don't drink when the sun is blazing down on your head and you've got hard work to do. We made a list of the things to be taken, and a pretty lengthy one it was before we parted that evening. The next day, which was Friday, we got them all together, and met in the evening to pack. We got a big Gladstone for the clothes, and a couple of hampers for the victuals and the cooking utensils. We moved the table up against the window, piled everything in a heap in the middle of the floor, and sat round and looked at it. I said I'd pack. I rather pride myself on my packing. Oh, I should get another drink. Oh my goodness. I rather pride myself on my packing. Packing is one of those many things that I feel I know more about than any other person living. It surprises me myself sometimes how many of these subjects there are. I impressed the fact upon George and Harris and told them that they had better leave the whole matter entirely to me. They fell into the suggestion with a readiness that had something uncanny about it. George put on a pipe and spread himself over the easy-chair. Harris cocked his legs on the table in the cigar. This was hardly what I intended. What I had meant, of course, was that I should boss the job, and that Harris and George should potter about under my direction, I pushing them aside every now and then with, "Oh, you! Here, let me do it. There you are, simple enough," really teaching them, as you might say. Their taking it in the way they did irritated me. There is nothing does irritate me more than seeing other people sitting about doing nothing when I'm working. I once I lived with a man once who used to make me mad that way. He would loll on the sofa and watch me doing things by the hour together, following me around the room with his eyes wherever I went. He said it did him real good to look on at me messing about. He said it made him feel that life was not an idle dream to be gaped and yawned through, but a noble task full of duty and stern work. He said he often wondered now how he could have gone on before he met me, never having anybody to look at while they worked. Now, I'm not like that. I can't sit still and see another man slaving and working. I want to get up and superintend, and walk round with my hands in my pockets and tell him what to do. It is my energetic nature. I can't help it. However, I did not say anything, but started the packing. It seemed a longer job than I had thought it was going to be, but I got the bag finished at last, and sat on it, and strapped it. "Aren't you going to put the boots in?" said Harris. And I looked round, and found I'd forgotten them. That's just like Harris. He couldn't have said a word until I'd gotten the bag shut and strapped, of course. And George laughed. One of those irritating, senseless, chuckle-headed, crack-jawed laughs of his. They do make me so wild. I opened the bag and packed the boots in, and then, just as I was going to close it, a horrible idea occurred to me. Had I packed my toothbrush? I don't know how it is, but I never do know whether I'd packed my toothbrush. Okay, this is another relatable bit, isn't it? My toothbrush is a thing that haunts me when I'm traveling, and makes my life a misery. I dream that I haven't packed it, and wake up in a cold perspiration, and get out of my bed and hunt for it. In the morning I pack it before I have used it, and I have to unpack again to get it. And it is always the last thing I turn out of the bag. Then I repack and forget it, and have to rush upstairs for it is at the last moment, and carry it to the railway station wrapped up in my pocket handkerchief. Of course I had to turn every mortal thing out now, and of course I could not find it. I rummaged the things up into much the same state that they must have been before the world was created. And when chaos reigned, of course I found George's and Harris's 18 times over, but I couldn't find my own. I put the things back one by one, and held everything up and shook it. Then I found it inside a boot. I repacked once more. When I had finished, George asked if the soap was in. I said I didn't care a hang whether the soap was in or whether it wasn't, and I slammed the bag to and strapped it, and found that I had packed my tobacco pouch in it, and had to reopen it. Got shut up finally at 10:05 p.m., and then there remained the hampers to do. Harris said that we should be wanting to start in less than 12 hours' time, and I thought that he and George had better do the rest, and I agreed and sat down, and they had to go. They began in a light-hearted spirit, evidently intending to show me how to do it. I made no comment, I only waited. When George is hanged, Harris will be the worst packer in this world, and I looked at the piles of plates and cups and kettles and bottles and jars and pies and stoves and cakes and tomatoes, etc., and felt that the thing would soon become exciting. It did. They started with breaking a cup. That was the first thing they did. They did that just to show you what they could do, and to get you interested. Then Harris packed the strawberry jam on top of a tomato, and squashed it. They had to pick out the tomato with a teaspoon. And then it was George's turn, and he trod on the butter. I didn't say anything, but I came over and sat on the edge of the table and watched them. It irritated them more than anything I could have said. I felt that. It made them nervous and excited, and they stepped on things, and put things behind them, and they couldn't find them when they wanted them. And they packed the pies at the bottom and put heavy things on top and smashed the pies in. They upset salt over everything, and as for the butter, I never saw two men do more with 1 and 2 pence worth of butter in my whole life than they did. After George had got it off his slipper, and they tried to put it in the kettle, it wouldn't go in, and what was in wouldn't come out. They did scrape it out at last, and put it down on a chair, and Harris sat on it, and it stuck to him, and they went looking for it all over the room. "I'll take my oath I put it down on that chair," said George, staring at the empty chair. I saw you do it myself not a minute ago, said Harris. Then they started round the room again looking for it, and then they met again in the center and stared at one another. Most extraordinary thing I ever heard of, said George. So mysterious, said Harris. Then George got round at the back of Harris and saw it. Why, here it is all the time, he exclaimed indignantly. Where? Cried Harris, spinning round. Stand still, can't you? Roared George, flying after him, and they got it off and packed it in the teapot. Montmorency was in it all, of course. Montmorency's ambition in life is to get in the way and be sworn at. If he can squirm in anywhere where he particularly is not wanted, and be a perfect nuisance and make people mad, and have things thrown at his head, then he feels his day has not been wasted. To get somebody to stumble over him and curse him steadily for an hour is his highest aim and object, and when he has succeeded in accomplishing this, his conceit becomes quite unbearable. He came and sat down on things, just when they were wanted to be packed, and he labored under the fixed belief that whenever Harris or George reached out their hand for anything, it was his cold, damp nose that they wanted. He put his leg into the jam, and he worried the teaspoons, and he pretended that the lemons were rats, and gone into the hamper and killed 3 of them before Harris could land him with the frying pan. Harris said I encouraged him. I didn't encourage him. A dog like that don't want any encouragement. It's like the natural original sin that is born in him that makes him do things like that. The packing was done at 12:50, and Harris sat on the big hamper and said he hoped nothing would be found broken. George said that if anything was broken, it was broken, which reflection seemed to comfort him. He also said he was ready for bed. We were all ready for bed. Harris was to sleep with us that night, and we went upstairs. We tossed for bed, and Harris had to sleep with me. He said, "Do you prefer the inside or the outside, Jay?" I said I generally preferred to sleep inside a bed. Harris said I was old. George said, "What time shall I wake you fellows?" Harris said, 6, 7. I said, "No, 6, because I wanted to write some letters." Harris and I had a bit of a row over it, but at last split the difference and said 6:30. "Wake us at 6:50. 6:30, George," we said. George made no answer, and we found on going over that he had been asleep for some time. So we placed the bath where he could tumble into it on getting out in the morning, and went to bed ourselves. Oh my goodness. Well, we'll stop there for now. Quite the book, isn't it, so far? Oh my goodness, I am really enjoying it. Oh. I hope you've been enjoying it too, my dear scholars. Oh, I'm so out of breath, I don't think I can keep talking. So, let's talk about next week. Next week, the schedule's going to be the same. Tuesday, if everything goes according to plan, we're going to be playing the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. And on Thursday, again, if everything goes according to plan, we will be doing 3 Men in a Boat. Hopefully 4 more chapters, I think. Cool Skeleton is good boat. Yeah, good book. Yes, it is a good book. It's a very relatable book, let's be honest. Okay, let me see. Let's see if there is any Cool Skeleton, much humor, a lot of humor. Let's see if there's anyone we can... let's join Sophia Ignacy now. She's reading 5 Children and It by Edith Nesbit, which is a great book. And I think we should go and raid her tonight. So, my dear scholars, I say unto you, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Till we meet each other again in the study. I shall see you next time. Till then, farewell and bye-bye.